Everybody, wait a minute. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. Hey, what's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like right here on Black Liberation Media. Good morning. Happy Monday to everyone. Greetings to you all. I am Jared Ball, very happy to be your host. So just off the top, just quickly, we are not live. I'm back on the 4-4. But I had sort of messed up my schedule. So a couple of things. We're not live. And Dr. Orasami Burton will not be joining us this morning, be joining us hopefully next week or maybe even sooner for a return visit to the show and the platform. Salute to him. And so just to clear that up. Another thing in terms of some business, the show's going to be a little shorter. I'll explain that in a minute today, and so apologies in advance, but I wanted to at least put something here, really just more than anything, to allow the remixers to gather. So I didn't want to, but what actually had happened, what had happened was that I was intending to post the video from the event last night at Busboys and Poets in DC, where I was invited by Pamela Pinnock, salute to her, to have a conversation about American nationalism and Black America. And TLDR, the recording didn't work. So I am just doing an early morning pre-record before I head off to work to do a couple of things, and then, as I said, allow the remixes to gather. Um, and I will uh, get the show reorganized and everything, for next week and in between and all of that. So, um, that said, of course, please do like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon, blackliberationmedia.org for more. Make sure you have the bell rung so you're not missing all of the offerings as they show up. Uh, a lot more to come, so please do what you can to, again, continue to support the platform. The Remix Morning Show back all week, as are many others. So all to the good. All right. That said, I did want to at least talk a little bit about what happened last night before, and then I want to we'll do a couple of other things real quick before. So actually, what we're going to do this morning, talk a little bit about the event last night. We're going to talk a little bit about some more iterations of buying power mythology, and then wrap by talking about chapter 6 in the slow motion review of socialist reconstruction, talking about housing, and then uh, I will dip out, and but hopefully this will at least do a little bit of what the intent had been for this show and this morning, and again for the remixers. So salute to all of you, and salute to those of you who were at Busboys last night. BAP, of course, was in the building. Uh, some of the all stars, Kai, Elon, and of course we saw Netfa, which was always good. At the we were at 14th and V last night. In Northwest DC for at Busboys and Poets, where for again to have this discussion. And I got to see some of the all stars from back in the WPFW days. So it was good on that level. It was good. It was good to get out of the house a little bit, and I liked being juxtaposed one room over from folks watching the football game, as the Washington Commanders fell to the Eagles. And I admit it felt kind of good because, as I joked it last night, 10 years ago, maybe, certainly 20 years ago, I would have skipped my own event to be watching that game. And so it was good to see, to know that some folks would show up to not watch the game, and it also felt good to not be wrapped up in wanting to see the game myself. It was weird to think about how little I care now, given how much I used to care at one point. But so it was good. Got to catch up with a couple folks that I haven't seen in a while, meet some new folks, and so it was. I had a good time. And the discussion was good. Well, the other thing that was good too, by the way, is I did get, I will say, shout out uh, to Andy Shalal, the owner of Bus Boys, who was there last night as well. And a couple minutes before the event started, had a minute to talk with him, and I said to him, I just want to let you know, while I got your attention here, that you know your book procurer had initially said that they wouldn't put my book in your store, and I don't remember if I told, because I had told Pamela. Now I can't remember if I told him too, because I told Pamela that I wanted to let her know I'm intending to have a little fun with that tonight, and And but to his credit, Andy, and well, to his credit, Andy said that he didn't know about that. He was very apologetic. He moved immediately to make corrections and was uh you know grateful that I brought this to his attention and wanted to, uh he even acknowledged, how many years I've been, coming around the space and all this other kind of, so it was good. And the moral, I think, of the story is, of course, that my personal boycott of busboys can now end. No, no, it's not. No, the real moral of the story is I think an important lesson, actually, that I went and spoke to him directly. And what often does not happen is people don't do that. And his reaction was principled and the problem solved. So I should have done that sooner. Uh, in that instance and others. And, more often than not, that is the outcome. Either that, or at least you get clear on what the issues are. And if there needs to be a permanent break with the person, then let it be. But the whole point, I don't think the whole point that is often cited around Mao's, combating liberalism applies, given that, again, he and I were not in an organized effort together to begin with. But I do think that the underlying principle of addressing issues directly to avoid contradictions, confusions, or worse, is obviously a good one. And so I will, shout out to Andy and belated shout out to me for finally just addressing it directly. Uh, um, though I do think if we were in spaces more often together, it would have happened sooner. But nonetheless, that's largely on me, and problem solved. So I think that's dope. That's dope. So a good time all around last night. Now the discussion that was a lot to do with, again, as I said, this question of Black American identity and American nationalism. So the first question last night that I was asked was, what are my thoughts around what is American nationalism? And I did the best I could to go into this short answer about American nationalism being a reflection of settler colonialism and imperialism and a particular brand of whiteness. And I didn't say it, but I was thinking in the back of my head of that point Malcolm used to make about, when the white man in Islam or in even other parts of the world, in some cases, some says he's white, he's just speaking about matter of factly. But here in the US, when a white man says he's white, he means boss. But so essentially that's what I was just, when I think of nationalism, certainly American nationalism, I should say, the first thing I start thinking of is hostility, aggression, extraction, exploitation, violence. And I don't think I made this point directly either, but that's how, even in putting the thumbnail together this morning, even when adorning beauty or a form of blackness of some kind, even when being done politically to make a point, I have a negative, hostile reaction to it. And as I've said elsewhere, I don't think I said this last night either. When I see the American flag, to me, it is no different than the Nazi flag, the American Confederate flag, I guess those are the two primary symbols we're supposed to think of. But to me, they're all I feel almost entirely the same when I see any of them. And I didn't make this point either last night, that in part how I've reached that conclusion is just being reminded that everything that happened negatively and legally to African people and others, indigenous people, and that's a point Netfa brought up last night that was really good. Um, but was legal under the federal auspices of that red, white, and blue flag. So this idea that all of the horrors are to be applied to the Confederacy, uh, I don't think applies. And of course, the Americans were in solidarity with the Nazis really up until the last minute. So I don't, you know, um, and before I forget, that point that Nefa brought up last night was that he brought up the discussion, if I remember correctly, in the context of American nationalism, of how it erases and how even some of us tend to erase in our historical narratives what happened to indigenous people. And I think he was even well, I took it as he was politely letting me know that I had done it too last night, in my focus on the question of blackness and Africans, but um but yeah, so yeah, I you know was happy to be corrected then and now. But that was because all of that is, I think, in league, and that's exactly how I tend to think of it. So when watching, because I knew the question was going to come up, but when watching some of the uh Beyonce halftime show from, or whatever this was, over the winter. I got corrected on this last night, but so I'm not going to play. I just want to show some of the iconography of it from whoever took this video. Oh, and I guess that's why it's okay. You know, because there was some discussion of, and this was one of the questions, I should say, that Pamela wanted to address with me and us last night. And there was some question of whether the use of the American flag in this performance was, I guess, somewhat, I don't know, tongue in cheek, and I just didn't think so. I thought the whole performance, and if you listen to it, it's a praise song for the United States. It's not just Beyonce saying, "Hey, we do country music originally," or "This was ours." It's not some reclamation, some blackness reclamation. It was we are part of this American narrative too. We can be just as American in Texas and cowboyish as you. And she's walking out on the flag. Her dancers have the red, white, and blue. It's all, it was all very pro-American, pro-country, pro-Texas, all of that kind of stuff. Um, and of course, that it's happening here or elsewhere, or as we've talked about before, and I should have mentioned this last night too, the Kendrick Super Bowl announcement. But it's all connected to, as I said about this last night, the military. Uh, this is all military imperialism, psychological warfare, counterinsurgency. This is the liberal counterinsurgency again. Shout out to Dylan Rodriguez. And yeah, see, I don't think that anybody here is wearing the American flag in some sort of, let's be critical of its relationship to us. No, it's let's, how can we hook it up within the outfit? Uh you know, Cowboy Carter. Um, Let me see this real quick, just so we can get the reminder. Is this gonna come up? Yeah, here we go. Uh, but it's the same thing here. Like, I don't think this Kendrick commercial is some sort of play, on the symbol. So so yeah, so we talked a little bit about that. I had told Pamela that I in some quick prep for the event last night went and tried to go back and see a little bit of what Bell Hooks had been saying about Beyonce. And the one thing I was reminded of, um by Hooks, was what, because she said she had gone back and read Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, Dr. King's last book, uh and I had done the same thing on her sort of posthumous suggestion here. And what King here was talking about was really the recalcitrant white supremacy in this country. And where he says here, this characterization is necessarily general. It would be grossly unfair to omit recognition of a minority of whites who genuinely want uh, authentic equality, their commitment to real, sincere, and their commitment is real, sincere, and is expressed in a thousand deeds. But they are balanced at the other end of the pole by the unregenerate segregationists who have declared that democracy is not worth having if it involves equality. The segregationist goal is the total reversal of all reforms with the re-establishment of naked oppression and, if need be, a native form of fascism. America had a master race in the antebellum South. Reestablishing it with the resurgent Klan and a totally disenfranchised lower class would realize the dream of too many extremists on the right. So, not entirely the same, of course, but similar to what George Jackson would say just a couple of years later. Fascism is here. The idea that fascism could be, is, um, has long been called out, and Dr. King was calling it out in his lifetime, much perhaps to the denial of those claiming to be his political heirs and, as Sharpton said recently, disciples. Uh, but by the way, in the context of this, of that statement, King was talking about why there needs to be massive federal involvement to the tune of billions of dollars and other structural political policy changes that would produce material conditions that would allow for any of these tendencies or feelings to be relieved, ameliorated, or, dare I say, one day erased. The point being, he was not advocating for some lesser of evil approach to voting, black capitalist approach to entrepreneurial liberation, none of that. In fact, he's explicit, that is King, in that book, that that's not enough. The point being here that he's saying, as he said in other spaces, the white American liberal would, as he said, would rather walk off with our aggressors than stand head up against their own fascists in their own communities and families. So just a quick aside there. And by the way, this was also something that came up last night, that part of what I was trying to argue, much like um, what the BLA study guide says, as we'll be using it again in my classes this semester, that essentially I do agree with the materialist point that if we want to see any changes in the culture of the community or the approach nationally to the definition of American nationalism, there have to be material changes, as King was and others were pointing to and have been for many, many years. That is, I don't think any rebranding of American nationalism can occur. I don't think any African culture can thrive, or anyone else's, until the material relationships change, until people have some room to breathe, have some safety, both in terms of from the police, the military, and in terms of their homes, healthcare, employment, whatever. There needs to be some material relief before any of that can occur. Uh, and the idea, kind of like what, because this came up in my other classes the other day again, but also around here, this used to be the argument or the disagreement I would have with the media reformists, of some years ago, who were arguing that democracy would be saved by changing the media environment, by having new laws and regulations protecting independence, protecting against consolidation of ownership, et cetera, and so forth, advertising influence and all of that, which is all to the good. But in the context, similar to what I was trying to say last night about nationalism, in the context of settler colonial imperialism and colonial dominance, identity, as is the case with a media environment, is part of the machinery of control. It's part of it is it is as illogical to argue that we can fix our media system and our definition of American nationalism before changing the material conditions, as it would be to argue that we can um oh, I forgot the analogy I was just going to use. That's crazy. Anyway, but the point being, it's not logical that we what was the analogy I was just about to work with? Oh man. Hopefully I get this together before I get to my classes. But essentially, anyway, the point I was just trying to make is that the material has to change first. That people, it's what was I going to say? It was something about, it was something about the military. Uh, it was something. I think it was something along the lines. I was trying to say something like it's illogical to argue that uh, the country's military be asked to stand down before dealing with any of the reordering of policy. And I can't remember what I was going to say. That's wild. It went just that fast, completely erased. uh Material conditions have to change first, is ultimately the point. That's it. um yeah, national identity, culture being products of the material world, because they're weaponized. That was really the point I was trying to make, that the media environment and identity is weaponized uh, as part of the machinery of control of the ruling elite. So if that ruling elite still exists, there can be no change in the dominant narrative. That's why I was trying to say about the Beyonce performance. We're not we're not going to surreptitiously take over through some pop culture subversive even if that's what she was doing, and I don't think that's what she was doing, but some pop culture subversive. By the way, that reminds me, Dr. Brooks has not gotten back to me, Daphne Brooks. So I don't know if that's going to happen in terms of our discussion about her Beyonce class up there at Yale. But uh, you know, again, not with any animus, but this would just be a point of disagreement, I think. Also, by the way, got another email, and as I said at the beginning, is very long, so I didn't get a chance to finish it, so I don't even know if they concluded that they're going to join the show or not. But a very long, thoughtful email about Stuart Hall and Afro pessimism. Uh, just going back to that other discussion, um, and this person, and I actually love this. We don't agree, but they are in a principled, friendly, helpful way trying to walk me through what they see as my errors. So we'll see. I don't know. But anyway, I like that. Anyway, so okay. Um now I did it again. But uh so these are so Beyonce's performance is supported and allowed because it's doing the uh, liberal counterinsurgency work of through performance allowing some to suggest that something subversive is happening when it is in fact part of the broader militarized, propagandized, suppressive efforts of the ruling elite to co-opt, to brand. We talked a little bit about, again, with Dylan Rodriguez, what millennials are killing capitalism have talked a little bit about, but the the application of those counterinsurgency manual tactics discussed in the manual of the U.S. military to involve the state in symbolic manipulation, co-optation, rebranding, redefinition. So that's redefinition. Shout out to Black Star that I talked about on my little Saturday Night Live the other day. But yeah, the other thing that came up was a question last night about generations, and do I think, or do we think that generationally there is or is not more of an affinity among Black people for the United States and American nationalism and an American identity? And fundamentally, the argument that I was trying to make was that, and I'm trying to make, is that I agree with what Glenn Ford used to say, that it's not a generational thing in terms of age and chronology, that every generation had, but it's one of politics, not generation, was his point. That every generation has reactionaries and revolutionaries. That's the case today. My only slight caveat to that is that I do think today it's more difficult for people to discern what's happening, to decipher what's happening, because the presentation of Blackness, of certain topics and ideas, happens with greater prevalence today than ever. But it's the framing of those stories and discussions that is more insidious and obscure, making it harder for, I think, we were talking a little bit afterwards last night, and I was just thinking again, when I talked about Saturday night, this clip of Killer Mike on Cam Newton's podcast talking about Imam Jamil Al-Amin, who should be freed, but also in the context of Killer Mike saying, he's talking about this in the context of his idols like Kathy Hughes and Andy Young. And And I'm saying, how is a young person not well versed in these histories supposed to walk through those raindrops to see what's happening there? And I'll put the link in the show description if anybody if anybody didn't see it and wants to this discussion of that clip that I from Saturday night. But the the point being, I think it's unfair to expect people young and old in today's media environment. So this is where I'm saying it's not just generational, that but if you are born and raised in this media environment and not interrupted with political education and some form of intervention, how would anybody be able to see that clip and realize what's happening there? Which is why what we're doing here is so important, at least the effort. But because then when they leave that clip, almost everything else in their media environment is going to support the confusion. All the other how many podcasts or shows are going to be publicly critical of that discussion between Killer Mike and Cam Newton? Because if you're not, because on its surface, it's great. It's a famous rapper on a big time podcast saying free a political prisoner. But it's the framing of it. It's the liberal counterinsurgency of it. Which is again the sort of a state advertising marketing takeover of an approach or a discussion of radical politics, ideas, and people. That's how I'm simply oversimplifying the definition of liberal counterinsurgency for this discussion, at least. So, uh, so I mean, in one breath, Mike goes from saying we got to free mom, and this is why what Andy Young teaches me is so important, and it's like, I mean, wow, the contradictions are massive in that, and how could we expect anybody to decipher that, and then to realize or to see their favorite rappers or singers or performers, they don't have the examples, the counterexamples of a popular condemnation of American nationalism. So when they see that, what is the likelihood of being awakened to its yeah. Um so that was a little bit from what happened last night, and I do wish we had the recording, but you can but that's essentially how it went. And again, like I said, it was great to catch up with some folks. And by the way, I was just trying to look real quick. I don't see any. I mentioned it the other night. Has anybody seen any updates on Abu Nima's being arrested in Switzerland? This is already 2 days old, and I don't see any new headlines here on Electronic Intifada. But yeah, after the ceasefire, wow, Israel still all right. Well, uh, just was curious as I thought about American nationalism and political imprisonment. Uh, Thought I'd just quickly look into that, try to keep up with that story. All right. Earlier this month, and again, this is somewhat similar because, well, I mean, again, the thread is that whether it's black capitalism, financial literacy, American nationalism, uh, 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 anti-soda politics, all of them have very white conservative colonial origins that are then distilled and promoted through, in many cases, or in some cases at least, very talented, capable Black spokespeople, and which makes it again more complicated and difficult to recognize what's happening. And obviously, this is the same thing that happens with buying power. And I got sent a couple of things that I'll get to in a minute, but one is just I try to keep up with Advertising Age, one of the oldest marketing industry trade journals, and I saw this story from a couple weeks ago, why multicultural marketing is obsolete. Culture should not be compartmentalized, but recognized as the universal language driving commerce. All right. And again, I think it's important to note that the the look at this. You can look at that there. Okay, interesting. That the well, that the point again here is what uh buying power and marketing can do to drive commerce, because of course that's what advertising is here for, to drive commerce. Buying power is a reference to the ability to enrich those who own the economy, to by driving commerce. All right. So uh but also this was sort of what came up last night in terms of this American nationalist. Can there be alternative cultures practiced, African centered or otherwise? And this is somewhat related to what Netfa brought up in our erasure of indigenous. Can the indigenous, and this even came up in my discussion recently over the definitions and discussions of settler and internal colonialism, and the point that one of the authors made about a true anti-settler colonial movement would be one that redefines the indigenous and others as members of a certain, in this case, US nation. The point being is I remember it because if you're trying to really have an anti-settler colonial movement, the entity being settled and rebranded has to be removed. And the or fully integrated into what would then not be a settler colony anymore, because there are no more indigenous people, something like that. But it's in fact definitely want to revisit that. But but when I read that culture in the context here should not be compartmentalized, what I hear is that the American Western Eurocentric view needs to be further imposed and consolidated. Not the again, not the allowing. It's not meant to for some equal exchange, cultural exchange. That's not the goal. Uh, the conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion is more than a debate about corporate strategy or public policy. It's a meditation on the American promise, the moral weight of equality, and the messy, beautiful contradictions of human progress. And again, this is somewhat what we discussed last night, the American promise, because one of the questions last night was, is American nationalism antithetical to Black liberation? And I was saying, yeah, because as I started off, it's American nationalism is white settler colonial, not about the inclusion or liberation of Black or anyone else. So the American promise is not one of equality and beautiful contradictions of human progress. The American promise is one of capital exploitation, capitalist exploitation, and settler dominance. Equity is the destination, but equality is the road. This isn't a new battle. In the 1970s and 1980s, multicultural advertising burst onto the scene, offering a mirror to the marginalized. For the first time, people of color, LGBTQ plus communities, and other historically excluded groups saw themselves reflected in glossy magazines and 30-second TV spots. But that reflection came with an asterisk. It was separate, distinct, something other, but reminiscent of Jim Crow South, separate but equal. But again, this is these approaches and these kinds of stories depoliticize what is happening here and decontextualize what is happening here. Why were these groups more represented in advertising? As part of, as Fons Wolf talks about, a corporate reconquering of America and a suppression of Black liberation and other struggles. It was not so it wasn't just something reminiscent of an other or separate but equal. It was one meant to justify the lack of equality and continued separateness, and to help further that process. That's how we end up in a situation here in Columbia, Maryland, where even with the relative affluence of the Black and white communities and an increase numerically of Black people in this area, the actual interaction between Black and white has not increased in 50 years. That's how you end up, because the incorporation of these people and struggles was meant to maintain a certain inequality and separateness without it appearing as such, and without there being, with or at least being less of a threat of rebellion from those communities, who then get to see themselves in all these commercials and TV shows. When does the multi dissolve into the mainstream? When will culture no longer be compartmentalized, but recognized as the universal language that drives global commerce? So again, marketing, they're not interested in uh, actual equality or liberation. They're trying to find ways to develop this universal language of driving global commerce. By 2044, the US will become a majority minority nation with Hispanic, Black, Asian, and multicultural populations surpassing 50%. Already, Black Americans influence more than 1.6 trillion in buying power, while Latino consumers wield 2.8 trillion globally, figures that outpace the GDP of entire nations. Yet of ad only 6% of ad spend in the US is allocated to multicultural audiences. These numbers don't reflect niche markets, they reflect the mainstream. So remember, before he got in this recent trouble, this was Diddy's argument around Revolt TV. This is Roland Martin's argument. This is the NNPA's argument around the Black press. This is what they're all saying. They're not saying Black people are, or any of these groups are, exploited. They're not saying any of these groups need to radically organize. They're not saying any of that. They're saying the advertising community needs to spend more of its ad revenue to target all of this money these populations are spending. They don't cite any numbers. They don't cite their sources. There's no explanation as to how they're reaching these numbers. What they and also note, again, they're not arguing that this is going to liberate anyone. What they're arguing is that this is money that ad revenue, ad buyers can and it's couched in this argument of, hey, we're all one people, let's just drive the economy. It's the selling the Negro argument all over again. It's broad, just expanded. Hey, none of us want to rebel, we all just want that good American identity and middle class experience, and we will spend our money on your products to do it. And again, they repeat this again nonsense around the GDP of entire nations. As GDP does not measure inequality in a community, it measures what is spent on the goods and services, meaning it is a measurement of what is available to enrich the owners of those goods and services. And this is sort of what was kind of talked about last night, and what we're seeing with the what I was even arguing about the Beyonce performance. Meanwhile, Generation Z, the most diverse generation in history, has grown up in a world where culture isn't segmented but shared. They don't see hip hop as black music or streetwear as niche. They see it as the culture. Brands that fail to evolve and continue treating multicultural markets as afterthoughts risk irrelevance because, in the new economy, culture isn't a subcategory, it's the currency of connection. But when I read this, I read again a successful imperialist conquest or marketing campaign. What do you mean hip hop is not seen as black music? And who would want that? Why would we ever again, I'm reminded of the debates going back decades. Remember anybody being in those spaces where we were asked, should hip hop studies be its own field or a subset of black studies? Anybody else in the audience been in those arguments? I remember at a hip hop conference like 20 years ago, people got mad at me because I said, of course, I was like, how are you even asking this question? How can you have the study of hip hop be disassociated from the study of black people? Why would you want that? And this is not about pride or bragging. It's about historical accuracy. You cannot understand hip hop without understanding really the African diaspora experience as it played out here in the United States. But and I saw Fat Joe get booed recently at a concert, and people were suggesting it's connected to his condemnation of foundational Black Americans and the Latino. No, Joe should be booed, but for many other reasons, not for reminding people of Latin Americans' contribution. But really, the point being, the history of hip hop and the interrelationship between Puerto Ricans and Black folks shouldn't be left in the hands of a Fat Joe. Um, but Fat Joe or anyone else being involved, it's black music, and the to the extent Puerto Ricans or anybody else are involved, they're part of and influenced by an African diaspora themselves. So again, but anyway, but the point being that from the marketing perspective of let's get rid of all of that so that we can get rid of niche marketing and just be seen as with this cultural currency of connection. uh yeah, but that's anyway, but that sort of speaks to what I was trying to say about the Beyonce performance, that she's it's not some radical reclamation of black history and its contribution or origins of country in any other art forms and da 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 da. It's her trying to perform this multicultural marketing argument of collapsing. If hip hop can't be seen as black music, then country can't be seen as white. We're just all in here doing everything all together, which of course erases the entire history. The author here again, as Marshall McLuhan once argued, the medium is the message. For these innovators, the message isn't just what they are, what they say, it's who they are. The work itself becomes the proof. And I made a note in here, I just even wrote it right there. But McLuhan is constantly abused here. Like, the medium is the message is misappropriate, is misapplied here. First of all, McLuhan wasn't just saying the message isn't just what they say, it's who they are. He was trying to make a point about the medium, the form of the in this way, the televised advertising is a reflection of what the society is, and McLuhan would argue that the content is irrelevant. The fact that there's people performing and conveying messages through an electronic mediated experience is the message of being conveyed. And I've always struggled with to what extent I understand or agree with that, but he's definitely not, you know. And as I pointed in my note here, McLuhan was also saying that advertising is a vast military operation. So he's not just saying, um, it would be better to understand that, I think, that what we're seeing in the performance of a Beyonce or black or so-called oppressed communities in commercials is the liberal counterinsurgency being conveyed, the message given the form of the and the use of the medium, and the purpose of it is liberal counterinsurgency, not a universal unified culture that drives consumption. The spectrum of prejudice has shifted, no longer confined to binaries of black and white, but radiating across lines of culture, religion, gender, and ideology. Hate evolves, but so must our capacity to confront it. To build a world where equity isn't an aspiration but a truth, we must begin at the roots in our homes, schools, and workplaces, because the foundation matters. And what we build upon, it will either stand tall or crumble beneath the weight of our indifference. If we truly believe that all people are created equal, then what follows should feel inevitable, not revolutionary. But if we want people to believe that we're all created equal, we're not going to do that through advertising and marketing campaigns. We're going to, and if anything, that's what I understand Marshall McLuhan to have been saying here. You can't, if the message in the medium, the message contained in the medium, that is the in this case the advertising message, is irrelevant. What is being said is irrelevant if this form of communication is taking place in the first place. I've always understood that to mean, and approached it to mean, that if the technology and the communication and the messaging is in the fundamental prima facie service of colonization, then apparent forms of inclusion and friendliness are, again, liberal counterinsurgency. They're propaganda, psychological warfare. So if people are to believe that we're created equal, they have to be treated in real life through policy and institutional established order, I guess, equally. We're not just going to start sending messages and Beyonce performances into the ether and have that change anything. This is how people, again, 20 some years ago, were arguing that hip hop was paving the way for a Barack Obama or some other form of political or economic elite, black or otherwise. No, that's not what's happening. The presentation of the Obamas and the black and the brown and the Beyoncés is to mask the continued exploitation. So you don't start by assessing the claims of a marketing campaign. You start by assessing the policy and the material conditions of the people. That's my method, at least. And I think it's the best approach so that we don't get caught up in the mythologies and the false claims. So would the idea be that if 50% of ad revenue targeted or either black and brown owned media and or included black and brown and other so-called minorities in their content, is that what would that signify? While 800 people are worth $6 trillion. All right. This was sent to me. I'll share a couple of clips just because there's at a recent discussion. So this is kind of like this was of the National Urban League. This reminds me of that room I got to be in once, similar to something like this, an emergency session on DEI conducted by the Urban League, Mark Morial and crew. And actually a fancier room we were in than this, but it was similarly arranged where you have representatives of all these different groups of people, so-called minorities, oppressed communities, and they're all giving their sort of reports and statements on DEI and the conditions of their community. It's all negative, it's all horrible, everybody's in bad shape. But and that was at that meeting where Jared Bernstein, then the economic advisor to Biden, got up and walked out, basically said, "Hey, thanks everybody for your reports. We have nothing in the policy pipeline to help any of you." Whoopsies. But I watched some of this because it was sent to me. Shout out to Eve with and I even got timestamps for how they were approaching this issue of buying power and consumption and diversity. And so just want to watch a couple minutes of this and you'll it's wild. But here we go.
Kelly Robinson.
Hey everyone, I'm Kelly Robinson, president of the Human Rights Campaign Foundation. Grateful to be here. And I just have to say, the diversity of our nation, the diversity of this table, it is our greatest strength. And when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, let's not sugarcoat it. It's good for people, but it's also good for business. What this work is really about is attracting top talent, about earning the business of
Message.
It's about increasing the bottom lines of business. And what I want to say is that the future that our opponents are so afraid of, future that opponents of diversity are so afraid of, it is already here. LGBTQ plus people in America represent $1.4 trillion in buying power. 30% of Generation Z identify as a member of our community, and yet still, a third of our community experiences harassment and discrimination at work. And yet still, violence is increasing day over day, month after month, as reported by the FBI. This is a moment where for us to embrace the opportunity of tomorrow, we've got to stand and protect the progress that we've made of today, especially in workplaces and schools.
So there you see it again. So are we then to argue that because the LGBTQ community has about roughly the same buying power as black people, that they are either similarly oppressed or similarly free? But she said again the loud part or the quiet part out loud again, and this is part of the strategy that we've seen McKinsey and others in their materials as they approach this topic. stop oppressing people. It's good for business. But part of the problem with that, and this is why I've always liked the approach of the frame of colonialism, is that colonialism is not just a material process of exploitation. It has an immaterial component where the goal is not simply some material extraction of labor and wealth and resource. It is an immaterial extraction of power, authority, self-concept. So the idea that so of course you have 1 point some trillion dollars in spending, but then it's presented in that clip as if but we're still being abused. FBI statistics are still saying our communities are, and there's it's almost said as if there's some confusion there. So what you thought because you spend some more in the economy that people are going to treat you better? No, the point is you spend more in the economy. Keep spending. It's what the economy needs. It's what enriches those 800 people worth $6+ trillion. That's how this works. But what you're not focused on is some actual political power and an end to that hostility. Because your approach is, hey, stop beating me. I'm willing to spend. Don't oppress me. I'm willing to spend. It's the macrocosm of Oprah showing up at the jewelry store and being turned away. Like, what are you talking about? I'm not here. I'm not a threat to you. I'm here to make you money. Where it's like the black version of Michael Clayton. When he's like, I'm not the guy you kill. I'm the guy you bribe. All right, so that's the that was one. Let me play another clip here because it's just like the greatest hits of buying power. Mhm.
It is an honor to be in community with all of you today. Thank you so much, Mark, for including us. My name is Brenda Victoria Castillo, and I am the first woman president and CEO of the National Hispanic Media Coalition. I'm an Indigenous Latina feminist, first generation. NHMC was founded to eliminate hate and discrimination and racism towards the Latino community. And I would like to remind people, when I use the term Latino, I mean all of us. We are Indigenous Latinos, we are Afro-Latinos, we're Asian Latinos, we're members of the LGBTQ+ communities. We are veterans. We have disabilities. We speak Spanish, some of us are monolingual. We are multicultural. And the future of America is multicultural. And I want to come back to that at the end. I was asked to speak today about the need to ensure accurate and equitable portrayals of Latinos communities in media. Representation matters. We need representation at the highest level, media ownership, board of directors, C-suite positions, the Greenlight projects, and companies must support diverse workforce development programs.
Again, just quickly before we even get to the buying power part, again, it's we don't need a change in these structures and how they relate to society or the fact of their existence. We just need more of us to be at the helm, to be involved. We just need more neo-colonial administrators.
What we also need, though, is the Latino community that represents a buying power of $3.6 trillion. In 2024, it was increased by 13%. Our buying power is $3.6 trillion, not billion, trillion dollars. This is why NHMC focuses on our policy work here in Washington, D.C. to our media work, advocacy work in Hollywood, where we connect collaborate, and create opportunities through our workforce development programs. We partner with corporate America, but we focus on media companies because it is one of the most influential and powerful institutions that shape society's mind, attitudes, values, and beliefs. And the way we are portrayed is the way we are treated in real life. And we're
Okay, so a couple of fallacies there. One, how you're portrayed is not always reflective of how you're treated. And again, this is sort of my point, because in many ways we've seen an improvement in how Black people are treated in popular film or media relative, but the conditions don't change. So the idea that you're going to have more Latinos portrayed, not as criminals or hypersexual whatevers or maids or whatever, the idea that that's going to translate into some, no, that's not the reason, as she said, that there's a focus on media companies as opposed to anywhere else is at least primarily is because no other areas in the economy are open to Black and brown people in these ways. Again, where else would you go? And then the other component of that is that media companies, as we hear all the time, as I mentioned a moment ago, are intimately connected with this mythology of buying power, both in promoting it, but using it to attract ad revenue. So so the focus on media companies is not just this is our tactic or strategy. It's because that's where you're relegated. That's where the fight is limited to. That's in part how they continue to win, by limiting the scope of how and where we fight. So if because you're not targeting obviously other more dominant sectors of the economy, you're targeting areas where Black and brown people have some relative access, and where the industry is itself seen as more open to this lane of buying power and the capture of ad revenue. I'm trying to just think of the Fortune 500 or the 500 or the business roundtable companies that form the business roundtable. They don't have they're less likely to be caught up in this buying power and distribution or need to capture ad revenue because either they don't need the advertising, or they have different strategies, or they are just so singularly white dominated that, but here Black and brown people, so yeah, so when she's saying we partner with corporate America, but we target media companies, that's how I interpret what she means by that, because media companies are the most susceptible to this argument of ad revenue, buying power, and this idea that if we get some representation and inclusion, it's an advance. And this is again how we get caught up in the trick bag of having Black celebrity, hence Beyonce or anyone else, But again, the reported 3 point whatever trillion in buying power, I don't know exactly how that number, again, these numbers are fictitious. But I don't know where she's saying, because there's no sourcing, but I don't know where she's saying she's getting that, or how that's being compiled and what that's supposed to reflect. But that's again the idea that then we would be expected to argue that because it's almost twice what Black people have, that are Latin Americans, do we see them as being twice as free and liberated as Black people in the United States? Is that what the argument would then be? All right, there's one more here. Let me pull up this one more clip. Wait a second. All right, there we go.
Who are our allies and friends,
Smart Mario.
that this is not a moment for paralysis of analysis, it's a moment for action. We must energize those in positions of economic power that collectively around this table, the communities represented, represent more than $5 trillion in consumer spending power. And that consumer spending power is a tool to be deployed and employed. We must use everything that we have to fight this battle. It was important for us to send a message to those that wrote this series of executive orders, that these executive orders are unlawful, they are unconstitutional, and they seek to do what we always suspected. This is not a monarchy. You can't rule by decree or edict. This is a constitutional democracy. There are statutes with obligations. There's a body of jurisprudence that represent precedent that we stand on. And we have to recognize that and remember this as we go into this very, very significant and important battle. Now, everyone will ask us, what did we do today? What action steps did we take? Melanie hinted at this. We're not telegraphing our blows. We're not going to sit here and muse about what we're going to do until we have had an opportunity to build the consensus that we need amongst ourselves. So to that.
So in other words, we're not going to announce something that we can't organize ourselves to do and have not organized ourselves to do. We're here just to alert everybody that we don't like these attacks on DEI and that we don't like the threats to our jobs and funding streams that come with that. And we want to remind you that we are here to be good consumers and that we represent a consumption power that you should appreciate. And so this kind of, we're not going to telegraph our blows as if something again is something strategic or I mean, I don't believe that. I'm not privy to any conversations, but I don't believe that. I believe that they just don't have any organized capacity to do anything. What are they going to do? What are they going to call for, a boycott of products? Is that the threat? That's the tacit threat there. What else are you going to call for? You're not calling for some radical political approach. You're not calling for a denial of votes to the Democratic Party. You're not going to call for any of that. You're going to try to make some deal so that the funding streams, the corporate payouts to Black advertisers or corporations or nonprofits to promote themselves and get their equity scores up are drying up. They want to protect all of that, but there's no, because again, they keep talking about the 5 trillion in buying power, in consumption power. That means a power to consume the products of white corporations and enrich them. That's what that means. If there's really a threat or a move to be made here to benefit all of these aggrieved communities, it should be a political one, going back to what Dr. King I mentioned earlier, and others that they claim to be the heirs of a struggle for that seeks to address the outcomes, the 20+ trillion in GDP that's generated every year. You're talking about the 5 trillion that you represent in consuming power. What about the trillions in wealth that are produced every year? Why aren't we making arguments? Why isn't that table organized and unifying or unifying around the goal to organize a collective movement that says, okay, you want to get rid of DEI, fine. The country is produced, what was it, 150 trillion in private wealth, 450 trillion in private wealth globally, 20 trillion annually in a GDP here in this country. We want our cut. but they don't. That's not the call. It's we're going to withhold our, and then what? We're gonna tell black people to collectively stop buying what? If every black person stopped buying what product, if every black person agreed to stop buying from what one company, would result in what? Even if you could get that to happen, what would the goal be? If every black person stopped going to McDonald's, or stop buying Coca-Cola or Nike, or stop flying Delta, or whatever, pick one. What would the to do what? For what? What is the ask? So that unless Delta spends more than the 6% that's going to so-called minority-owned or media outlets. What are we saying? What would the goal be? If Roland Martin's media operation gets twice the advertising budget, let's say if Roland Martin gets 5 times his current advertising budget, what then? We just get better programming from Roland Martin? I mean, what is the idea then that the violence of the sister said from the LGBT community, that it suffered by the LGBTQ community, is going to go away? Black people then going to be free? Latinos won't be targeted and abused? Like I mean, this is so. All right, so I see. I'm not gonna rush to do the socialist reconstruction chapter that I had said I would. I'm gonna start to wrap up here, unfortunately, early, or slightly earlier than I planned. Um, but I don't want to. I don't really have the time. I don't want to rush to do that. But um, so we'll come back and do that another time. Uh, yeah. I don't want to try to rush to do it. But the short of it is that, I mean, for now at least, is that part of the way I would have wanted to connect it to today is that they're making arguments around the outcomes and structuring a society that can't lead to the kinds of inequality and abuse that we have now, and that provide the material conditions for that. So again, what I like about their appeal, it's not some moral appeal, it's not some false appeal to the business bottom lines of corporations. It's an appeal to all of us to say, theoretically, humanity could build a society. We could build a society where, by demonstration in this country, uh, the 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 focus is the redistribution of all the resources, not the accumulation. And then we don't have to have all of these silly appeals to the business community to spend their money with us. And by that, I mean a segment of us, the class beneficiaries, as Dr. King also pointed to, who benefit from our struggles more than the rest of us. And so that's what I like about the socialist reconstruction argument in the book. I don't it, it's I mean, I'm sure certainly within the chat there are errors or flaws or shortcomings to be found, but that general goal I find much more appealing than certainly what we see in these kinds of gatherings here, which is, again, where we're going to rebrand ourselves. Just to connect it back to the beginning, we're going to rebrand ourselves as and as you saw even pictured in that scene with the American flag there, we are Americans. This country is diverse. We deserve recognition and representation, and of course increased revenue from your ad spends. We we're here to help you. And I don't like that approach. I don't think our approach should be, we're here to help you as you currently exist. No, we're here to help you move to an elevated stage of political enlightenment. But this idea that we're going to make appeals and we're going to couch this as we're all, carrying, we're all, standing here representing all of our various communities, struggling for you. We're going to get that bag and we're going to bring it back to the community. That's not, we're producing the bag every day. So why should we go back to them at the end and say, hey, give me a little bit more of what I've just handed over to you? I don't like that. And then it sort of, it comes back to this, we're not wrapping ourselves in the American flag to criticize, condemn, or change it. We're wrapping ourselves in it because we literally want to be it. So it was even asked last night, that point that we often hear, well, Black people, we built this country, we deserve our right to claim it, and our ancestors built it. And I said, yeah, but our other ancestors also built other civilizations before this one that we have as much a right to claim. So why should we limit ourselves with this American identity? Yeah, my African ancestors built this country, but my African ancestors built many countries. They built many what we now call countries and civilizations and religions and philosophies and sciences. Why would I stop at this simple, silly, most recent, in terms of world history, thing called an American? This is brand new. Or why, if that's the logic, yeah, I want this country and everything else then. And why would I stop there? I'm an American. I'm a Panamanian. I'm a Jamaican. I'm a Ghanaian. I'm a Russian. I'm Chinese. I'm Japanese. I mean, we're everything then. Built everything. Everybody's working off of some variant of African something. So, but all right, listen, everybody, I really do appreciate seeing everybody last night. I appreciate everybody who's joining us here live this morning and who will see this and hear this later. Peace and welcome to you as well. Apologies for it being a little bit shorter than normal. Apologies for the confusion around Dr. Orasami Burton. We'll get him back as soon as possible. And, make sure you've got the bell rung, like, share, subscribe, support all the things that are happening around these parts. And I hope you have a good Monday and a good week. All right, everybody. Peace only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. Big salute to everybody. Shout out to everybody once again. I'll catch you in the whirlwind. See you around these parts soon. And catch you next time right here at I Mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
And what do you sacrifice?
Calm, kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, that set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy and defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. The ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything, 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 everything.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.